Hannah, you say our brains are practically hardwired to make awful money choices, which is an interesting take because a lot of times we hear, well, it's based on what we heard growing up or, the sentiment around money as a child or as you become an adult, kind of your feelings around money. But this sounds a little bit different that it's like our brains are directing us to make money choices. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of both, but I definitely wouldn't neglect the role that our, hardwiring in our brains play when we make money decisions. A great example is, the stock market. We have a tendency, again, hardwired in our brains. This goes way back evolution wise to we want to protect what's ours and we want to like keep it safe. And so, for example, if you see the stock market go up and down, it triggers something called loss aversion, which is a very common cognitive bias. And that will trigger in us this kind of feeling of, oh, I need to like protect what's mine. And that's, drives those types of behaviors like selling during kind of market volatility. And again, this is just one small example of how, our brains are, wired to protect us and keep us safe. And it definitely wasn't, back when we kind of built these neural pathways, we weren't thinking about the digital age and seeing the stock market go up and down. So it's hard for our brains to tell the difference between what is a real emergency and what isn't. It's the same neurons being triggered in our brains. And the same goes for when we purchase something like a material item that triggers dopamine. That's the same neurochemical that is released when we, back in the Stone Age when they were going on a hunt and they kind of caught the big animal. It's the same kind of hardwiring that drives a lot of our decision making when it comes to money. And while I think it's really important to also think about kind of the role that our childhood, early money experiences have on our money, I think it's also important to be aware that we are often working against our biology. And that's why I always personally recommend working with your brain and building a framework to kind of support yourself instead of constantly working against it. Because at that point, you're going to have to rely just on willpower and discipline alone. And we all know that many of us cannot maintain that for a long period of time. That's not sustainable.
So, how do you work with your brain then? If you understand the way you think about money or the way your brain is wired about money, how do we work with it?
Yeah. So the very first thing, kind of like what you just said, is to understand the why behind why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that's a disconnect for a lot of people. I think people think of money as this very tangible, objective thing that we're always very rational about when it's anything but that. We are often very irrational when it comes to money. Often, our money decisions are made with by behavior and emotion. Money is wrapped up in our sense of identity and who we feel we are. So once you realize that, that's the first step. And then it kind of goes into, okay, once you start to kind of question and understand what's going into your financial decision making, what emotions are coming up, then you can work with yourself then without it. A great example I always give is, I will never go to the grocery store when I'm hungry or tired because I'm going to be spending way more money than I meant to. And so again, it's setting up those guardrails for yourself to make it easier for you to make those financial decisions in the moment. So again, it's not working against yourself, it's working in the confines of what you already have. Another great example, and this is like a pretty classic trick, is just automate, you know, automate those contributions to your retirement account, automate those contributions to your investments or your savings. Then you don't have to go through the mental brain power of having to consciously make that decision in the moment. Decision fatigue, I think, is something that everybody experiences. I mean, we all know at the end of a long day, it's a lot harder to make, really clearly thought out decisions for ourselves. So again, it's working and creating that decision framework and those guardrails for yourself, so you can kind of play life on easy mode, and you don't have to worry too much about having to really consciously make decisions every single moment.
Yes, because decision fatigue, it's a real thing,
Yeah.
right? And especially if we may not be completely confident in our decisions or we don't know where to look as far as making the decisions, that's a really big issue. So,
Yeah.
how can someone who has the decision fatigue address that and still make good money decisions?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, again, try to automate your decisions as much as possible when it comes to your money. So again, when it comes to, saving for the future, present bias is also a very common cognitive bias when it comes to our financial decision making. It's hard for us to think about, our future selves when our present self and our present needs are right here in front of us. So, setting yourself up for success in that way by, creating a game plan that's aligned with your values, which we can get into later, and, setting up those rules ahead of time so that you don't have to make that decision in the moment. The other thing I also recommend is, you know, setting up time and space to deal with your finances. And what I mean by that is, if you're someone who financially ruminates, if you have a lot of financial anxiety, if you're someone, I used to be someone like this, I would be checking my bank accounts constantly throughout the day. Set up that 30-minute, window, mark it on your calendar, end of the week. And that's that 30 minutes that you're going to dedicate to going through your budget, looking at your spending. And that way you don't have to spend time throughout the week financially ruminating, which leads to decision fatigue. You're saving your time for that period. And that way, you mentally can just put everything in that time period, and it just makes it easier to make financial decisions at the moment because oh, this is my 30 minutes that I'm focusing on my finances.
And I think how you said, I don't go grocery shopping if I'm hungry, or
Yeah.
if, what was the other? You
Hungry or
hungry or
tired.
tired? You said I don't go to the grocery store if I'm hungry or tired, and I follow a similar mantra. And I also think setting that time for you to review your money, you have to choose a time that's like peaceful.
Yes.
Don't do it when it feels like a chore or when you're stressed. If it's, Tuesday morning before everyone wakes up and you're drinking your coffee, pick a time that is very peaceful, and you're not going to be stressed, because then if you're in a stressful mood when you're looking at your money, we're then going to take that emotion and apply it to whatever we're looking at.
Yeah. And again, for me, as something that I really benefited from, and I know other people benefited from too, is just, I mean, I call them rules, but it's really just guidelines for yourself. Like another good example is, if I'm spending over a certain amount, let's just say $200, I will set like a 24-hour rule or 12-hour rule. Like before I spend this money, I'm just going to sit with this for 12 hours, 24 hours before I decide to make the purchase. That'll kind of slow down that decision making process, kind of slow down that impulse. So, I mean, a lot of the times I end up saying, oh, I didn't actually need that thing. That was just an impulse in the moment. And again, it's just creating those guardrails for yourself. So it just makes things easier. So you're not constantly straining to kind of think through decisions in the moment, because we make tens of thousands of decisions a day. So just making it a little bit easier on yourself can help tremendously in the long run.
And buying online obviously makes
Oh
purchasing
yeah.
so much easier, right? Before everything was on Amazon, I purchased nearly everything for my household on Amazon.
Yeah.
We had to drive to the store. Sometimes we had to drive to multiple stores. We saw it, we touched it, we could see it in front of us. And or we decided it's not even worth it. I don't feel like driving in traffic right now, or I don't have the time to go to the store. And that was kind of the way that we forgot about it, if you will, or decided, I really
Mhm.
don't need it. It's not worth me fighting traffic to go
Yeah.
get this thing. Now the barrier to entry to buy something or make a purchase is minimal, right? It's just, let
Yeah.
me just pick up my cell phone.
Yeah.
So definitely keeping it in your cart, I agree, is a great way to give yourself some time to think about it and decide, is it really worth it? And just put some thought behind the decision
Yeah.
versus it being a snap judgment.
Yeah, that's such a great example of when you actually want to create friction in the decision making process. I call it typically the pain of paying, where the digital landscape and just how things have evolved in our kind of world of consumerism, it's made it easier than ever to purchase. And when people were using cash, you were physically parting with something tangible, so you felt that tangible exchange more. Then came debit cards, credit cards, even paying with your phone. It kind of removes that pain of paying from the decision process. You're not really feeling like you're parting with anything when you're getting the item in return. And of course, now we have, even more barriers kind of being removed with, you reference Amazon, that one click to pay. It's never been more frictionless. Even with the rise of buy now, pay later, it just feels like less of an exchange, because you're like, oh, I'm only giving, 20%, 50% of the price in exchange for the item, when really you do owe that money. But psychologically, it feels like you're parting with less. So, with that in mind, it's never been more important to kind of set up those guardrails for yourself. So yeah, like I was saying before, that 24-hour window, but also I don't save my credit card in my computer. I don't save it in my phone. I have to make sure I have to physically get up and go get it. And even that 2-minute period where you're like rooting around looking for your card can be a way to slow down and say, oh, do I actually really need this item? It's crazy how that works.
Right. Do I even want to stand up, go
Yeah,
to get it? Or even worse, if like your wallet or your purse is in your car, I have to go down outside. I have to go get,
exactly.
once you have to do something like that, it really shows you if you want it that much,
Yep.
if you actually have to put some effort into it. But even as you said, we exchanged cash, then we started swiping debit cards and start swiping credit cards. And now even we don't even get a bill in the mail. At least
Yeah.
before, when you got a bill in the mail and you open it up and you're like, oh, okay. Now it's just numbers on a screen, like
Yeah.
emailed to you or you see on an app. So
Yeah.
really, it just removes the tangibleness. And I think I just made up a word
Love
of
it.
like your money or your money leaving your bank account
Yes.
or paying for something. It's like, yeah, all the friction of it is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, this is compounded with, you know, social media, the digital age. I mean, we're seeing new products, new stuff all around us. So I think it does, in a way, convince us like, oh, I need this thing, I need that thing. And again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying, by just how important it is to understand your values and understand how you can use your money to live your values. Because for so many people, they end up spending money in a way that doesn't align with actually how they want to live their life. And that's when you get into money anxiety, money shame, just really negative emotions around your money, because you're not living according to your truth, your values.
I just thought of this and I'm curious to hear your take on it. And I'm going
Mhm.
to be thinking out loud a little bit for a second. But we just talked about how like credit cards and bills and spending money is frictionless. It's
Yeah.
digital, it's a swipe, it's easy.
Hmm.
Investing's the same way,
Hmm.
right? I mean, before there used to be stock certificates. You would receive the
Hmm.
certificate and you'd hold it and that was my stock. And now everything's online. So it just like tells you how many shares.
Yeah.
But I feel like bills and stuff like that and spending is less painful because it's frictionless, but investing is also frictionless. But when we see our account values go down, because again, we rarely get statements in the mail, it's just a number emailed to us,
Yeah.
or we have to look online to see it. But that number still feels very real to people when in
Yeah.
actuality, it's the opposite. It's not your investment amount isn't a real number until you actually cash it out. So when someone
Yeah.
says, I lost $10,000 today, you did, but you didn't, because
Yeah.
it's not real until you actually cash it out and take that money and put it somewhere. It's
Yeah.
just like a number.
Yeah.
Where conversely, if we were to spend it, it doesn't feel real, even though that is the real part of it.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I think there might be a couple things, at play here. I think one, your bank account balance feels very personal to you, right? While you're investing in an account, you're kind of in it with all these other people. And, media is constantly talking about the stock market. People are constantly talking about how much money they're making on the stock market. So it feels like more of like a public forum to kind of see how you're measuring up to people in terms of your wealth. And so I think also, with your checking account, for example, I think you do assume to at least a degree that, money's gonna come and go out of the account as you're spending, as you're making money. But with a investing account, I mean, a lot of people hope and expect that it's gonna just keep going up. So I think when you then get that volatility that comes with the stock market, and when volatility does happen, it's all over the news, it's all over social media. So I think it just feels so much more real. And I think for a lot of people, because again, your expectation is that money is going to keep going up. When it goes down, your initial reaction is to, panic. And I think too, part of it could also be when you're spending money. I agree that yes, there is like a very frictionless experience, but you are the one swiping the card. You're the one clicking buy. So you do have a level of like, okay, I'm responsible for this. The stock market, you're like, well, wait, what happened? I didn't do anything. What's happening here? So I think it's like that feeling of, you know, almost unfairness or like, why is this happening? And so I think you can have, it's more of a gut punch, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I
Yes.
invested and it's up to other people essentially to make money for me. So you're giving the responsibility to someone else, whether
Yeah.
it's the company, the stock that you're investing in, the, exchange traded fund, the ETF that you're purchasing,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you're kind of giving responsibility to someone else to make
Yep.
money. And then when they don't, whether it's, the market as a whole or what have you, it's kind of like, wait, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. I did what I was supposed to do. We had a deal and I thought the
Yeah.
market always went up. Wait,
Yeah.
I'm mad. Let's move away from this strategy
Yeah.
now.
And again, it goes back to this idea of, I think for so many people, their money is so tied up in their sense of self. And, with a couple exceptions of dips, over the past, X amount of years, we've been in a great period of growth in the stock market. So for a lot of people, especially those that are just starting their investing journey during this period of time, they really have only experienced growth. So it's really easy to kind of wrap yourself up in this idea of, I am an investor that makes a lot of money in the stock market. And when that identity is, proved incorrect in some way, that is a hit. You're having to essentially kind of rethink who you are. And that can be really difficult for some people.
Absolutely. So you work a lot with women who are smart, successful, and financially literate, yet they're still making emotional money decisions, kind of
Yeah.
like with investing and with spending and all of that. So what's one strategy that actually helps them break that emotional cycle?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the really strong emotions that come with money, typically negative emotions, are because there's a disconnect between their financial reality and how we actually feel about it. And I think it really comes down to, not taking the time to think about what money represents to you. For a lot of people, money again is, equals security, freedom, success, self worth. And if you're not taking the time to think through, what you want your money to do for you, money is a tool to kind of live out the life you want to live. And if you haven't gone crystal clear about what you want to get out of your life with your money, you're going to continuously kind of, um, stumble in terms of your spending. And again, we're always going to have emotion when it comes to money. It's just so intrinsically wrapped up in our lives. But I think it's important to just be more aware. I mean, no money script or emotion is necessarily good or bad. It's just data to kind of better understand why you're making the decisions you're making. And I think it's just really important too to like have a little self-compassion for yourself. We're all kind of on this journey together. No one is ever going to be perfect. And so I think just saying like, instead of thinking like, oh, I'm bad with money because I made this mistake, instead just think, okay, I did something I probably shouldn't have done with my money, but let's keep moving forward. And again, I think that helps not necessarily take the emotion out of things, but just better understand why you're making the decisions you're making so you don't have that strong emotional reaction. Because when you're deep in your emotions, you're so much less likely to make a well thought out decision.
And it's kind of like, well, I'm a bad driver because I got one traffic ticket. No, you
Yeah.
you just you made a mistake and everyone does it and you got a ticket or what
Yeah.
have you. It's you're not all automatically labeled a bad driver, but we often do that with our money like, well, I'm just bad at it. Or they may have
Yeah.
not even done anything to get that bad stamp, right? They just don't know
Yeah.
what to do. So just because you don't know what to do doesn't mean you're bad at it. It just means you don't know what to do. And I
Yeah.
think that that's really important too, because I feel like oftentimes someone will say, well, I'm terrible with money. And it's like, well, why? And it's like, well, I don't know what to do
Yeah.
with it. That doesn't mean you're bad. You just don't know what to do. Um, so, what can we do as far as breaking that cycle? Like, I don't know what to do. So that means I'm bad at it, or labeling ourselves bad with money.
Yeah. So the first, again, practice that self compassion. You wouldn't run a marathon without training, right? So you can't expect that you're going to have this perfect financial behavior right out the gate. It's a journey, it's a work in progress. And going back to what you were saying too is, you can have all the financial education in the world. If you don't understand yourself and why you make the decisions you're making, it's going to be so hard to stick to financial habits in the long run. And also, the best financial habits for you are the ones that you can stick to in the long run. That's what's going to be most successful. It's not necessarily always, what works for one person but might not work for me. And that's okay. It's really just about being able to stick to something to the long run. The other things I say about breaking the cycle is, take something like that narrative you have in your head, like I'm bad with money, and kind of try to rework it. Like maybe I'm learning to be better at money, because again, when you're changing that, like, that identity you sign, like I'm bad at this, to instead I'm a work in progress, that changes your identity. That changes how you perceive yourself. And again, it becomes like the self-reinforcing cycle where if you do have a misstep down the road where you're like, well, you know what, it's fine because I'm learning, instead of I'm just bad with this. And like I was saying before, of course, figuring out your core values, aligning your money habits and spending with them. Because when you do that, your satisfaction goes up, your guilt, like all those negative emotions go down. And last, and this is challenging for everybody, but try your best to separate your self-worth from your net worth. You know, ask yourself, and I do this pretty frequently, if I lost all my money tomorrow, who would I be? What is important to me? And I think that can help untangle your identity a little bit from your finances. And again, money is always going to have an impact on the way that you're living your life, but it shouldn't define you, because as we all know, money comes and goes, so trying to untether yourself from that, I think, can make you, help you kind of lessen those super strong emotions you have around money.
Completely forgot what I was about to say because I had one question and I was going to ask another, and I'm like, let me do the first one first.
No problem.
I'm going to edit this out. Oh. When you say aligning your money with your values, I often say to clients, saving is a lot more fun when it has a purpose behind it, a goal behind it. And I think that's super important, because if you're just saving for the sake of saving, then you're never going to reach that finish line, because it's the carrot keeps on moving, right? The goalpost keeps on moving. So aligning what you're doing, aligning your money with your values is super important, because it puts a purpose behind it. It takes something that's intangible, money, and makes it tangible, really.
Yeah.
So how do you help someone identify their values and what they want their money to do for them?
Yeah. And the goalpost keeps moving is something I say, all the time. You have to determine like what that enough number is. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a tangible number, right? Or like this is the one number I'm going to stick to for the rest of my life. I think there's always going to be some flexibility. There's always going to be some changing. But, think about how you want to live your life. Think about kind of the goals that you have. And for a lot of people, it's often not tied to material items, right? So that one helps separate, the purchasing of things to like actually how you want to live your life. Maybe you value family. Maybe you value freedom, flexibility, the ability to travel. And once you kind of start to unpack those things, typically, there's plenty of quizzes online you can do to find your values, or just kind of write out, brain dump, like what is important to you. And then once you kind of start to find some themes, you can start to think about, well, if money's a tool to reach that, how can I line up my money to reach those things? And that's where you can start to really make that financial plan. And again, it's such a self-reinforcing cycle where once you kind of start to make those moves in that direction, you're going to start to feel that joy, that satisfaction that comes with living in your values. And something that's also really important is, trying to tune out the noise of what's going on around you, right? Because, we can see online, we can see talking to people, everybody has their own idea of what a good life looks like, right? And you want to make sure you are only focus on what is important to you. And I think, a great example is, take like the American dream, buying the house, having the family. That is definitely something a lot of people want. And that could be a money goal that they're saving for, but that might not be what everybody wants. I mean, a great personal example is, I started saving money at a young age. I had all this knowledge as a CFP. I was making good income. I was saving lots and lots of money, but I kept having this anxiety. And I kept thinking, what am I saving for? Right. And it really wasn't until I sat down, thought about what was important to me, where I actually started to build those concrete goals of like, oh no, I'm saving for this. And now when I do save, like you said before, when your savings has a purpose, you're one, so much more likely to do it. And two, you're so much likely to feel satisfaction and kind of value from that action.
Absolutely. And some oftentimes too, when you attach the a number to the goalpost, the number then changes because it's
Yep.
like, well, I thought I'd feel better if this was my number, but I think
Yep.
I'd feel even more better
Yep.
if it was this. So, and I'll often say to my clients, like, there's a point where when you open up the app on your phone and you view your accounts or you view your investments online, like that your stomach hurts. And then one day it's not going to hurt when you open it up. Like you're not going to get that funny feeling in your belly. And no one
Yep.
knows when that point's going to be, but that could be yours. So it's like, let's just get the first goal of being, the first goal could be, I'm not going to be scared to open up my
Yeah.
app right on my phone to view my bank accounts or my investment accounts.
Yeah.
But then the next goal could be like, let's get you to a point where like your stomach doesn't hurt. And we don't
Yeah.
know what number that's going to be, but like let's think about it. And if you set the date with yourself, you're doing it at a peaceful time during your day, during your week, you're looking at your accounts, one day your stomach's not going to hurt. And we'll like let's figure out how to get you there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was somebody that, like I was saying before, checking my accounts multiple times a day. And, you know, I developed this sort of script at a young age that, I had to prove my worth through financial success. I felt I needed like these quantifiable metrics to show I was successful. And of course, money is a very quantifiable metric. So I think a lot of people kind of hold on to that as a way to define success or benchmark themselves to other people. And, so for again, at the beginning of my career, it was like I was just saving lots of money. And I remember I kept telling myself, if I get to this one number, I'm going to feel great. I'm going to feel good. And I remember, I was like in my apartment, I was looking at my balance, and I remember thinking, waiting for this moment of like satisfaction. And I remember just going, okay, now what? And I think
Right.
that was the
Right.
sign for me where I was like, oh, there's a gap here. I need to, I need to figure out what I'm doing with this, because it wasn't that necessarily I needed more money or that was the end goal. I needed to understand like what money actually meant to me.
Right. Right. I got there, but everything else in my life is the same. Like
Yep.
I didn't do any in internal journey. I didn't discover myself or discover what I wanted. So it's like the number doesn't mean anything if you're not
Yeah.
doing all the other work to support that number.
Yeah.
And that's where, you said earlier, your self-worth doesn't equal your net worth. So
Yeah.
how do we break that? Because it's very easy. Like, and I don't feel like we do this to ourselves in any other area of our lives except for money. So why do we attach money to our self-worth?
Yeah. I think because it's so quantifiable, right? You know, you can't just look at somebody and say, just for a quick second and say, oh, they're a good friend. They're a good mother. However, you can look at somebody and you can make a pretty good snap judgment pretty quickly about how much wealth they have, or at least how much wealth it appears they have. It's just so much more quantifiable than other types of metrics. So I think people gravitate towards it because they feel like, oh, it's a really easy way for me to tell if I'm doing as well as everybody else, better than everybody else. And so I think that's where that comes in. And again, money, again, kind of is interjected in all areas of our life. So it feels like something that is just really wrapped up in who we are. And I think that's why it can be so hard sometimes to untether yourself, from this, from these types of, the identity, the money identity connection. I was just thinking about, I'd written a newsletter a couple weeks back about sudden wealth syndrome and like financial transitions and what happens when you go from having less money to having a ton of money, like a lottery winner, for example. Or maybe you're going through a financial event where you lose a lot of your money, and these transitions, they can be existential for people. When your money changes, everything changes with it, your relationships, your self image, your view of the world. So it's a lifelong journey, I think, kind of disconnecting yourself. And I think it will always be part of your foundation of, what you're thinking about when you're thinking about your life goals, how you want to live your life. Because again, money is that tool that kind of gets you there. But it's important to look at it as something like, again, just a tool. It's not a measure of anything. And that's where you have to kind of come in with these values and think about, well, how do I want to measure myself? Like, how do I want to determine if I've lived a good life or not? And then, of course, it gets into the whole, working to make sure you're not comparing yourself to other people. Very hard to do. I think humans, we're very social creatures. We're very community based. We want to know what other people are doing. But taking steps to kind of stop the social comparison game, I think can help a lot with untethering your identity from your money.
You said earlier, you can say, well, someone's a good friend, but they kind of have to show it, prove it. It
Right.
takes a period of time for someone to be like, yes, I'm a good friend. I'm good at my job or whatever. It's not like a snap right away. I know this person's a good friend. But you said
Yeah.
with money, like you can kind of look at someone and go, okay, like I have an idea of where they stand. But like even that it messes with your head because that might not even be accurate. So you can
Yeah.
look at someone and see their house or what they're driving or what they're wearing or whatever, anything, and make a snap judgment and go, oh, they probably do well, right?
Yep.
But you
Yeah.
don't know what's behind. You don't know the debt. You don't know the loans. You don't know anything behind it. So it messes with your head even more because you see someone, you make that snap judgment, but the reality could be very, very different.
Oh, yes. And I think social media has just completely blown this out of the water. I mean, back in the day, I always think, like, the whole phrase, like, you're the product of the people around you. I think that's very true when it comes to money and how you spend and how you save. And, before, you were looking at the people around you. It's like the keeping up with the Joneses. You were looking at the car your neighbors had, the house they had, and you were kind of comparing yourself based on that. Now you have access to tens of thousands of people online showing off their life. So you're constantly being bombarded by other people's life, what they own. And also, with social media, you don't even need actual money to appear wealthy. You can rent a private jet for an Instagram photo. You can kind of create the illusion of like having the super luxury lifestyle, just through like editing or just other ways. And so again, this just heightens the comparison, the social comparison, and it makes it almost impossible for us to really know how everybody is. And again, that just drives that financial anxiety. And again, going back to what I was saying before, is when you're in a state of really, really strong emotion when it comes to money, you're so much more likely to make those impulsive decisions. So if you're in that state of financial anxiety, you might buy that thing because you're seeing it all over Instagram. And you're not, falling back on those guardrails that you might have set for yourself.
As a recovering perfectionist, and I try to live by the mantra of perfect is the enemy of good, that can be a huge money killer. So, for the listeners out there who can't stop trying to get it just right or do it perfectly, what's one brain based practice that they can start today to let go and build a healthier relationship with their money?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is come up with habits to follow instead of hard rules or hard goals. Because again, like, maybe you're saying, okay, I want to save $10,000 by the end of the year. Life happens, that can lead to immense amount of stress when you have a quantifiable number. Instead, what if you said, I'm going to save between this amount and this amount each month? Or just set up good money habits. Like, again, going back to that 30-minute time period, I do it on Fridays. I'm easing into the weekend. You know, have that 30-minute period. This is where I'm going to hyper focus on my money. And then the rest of it, just kind of let it go. And again, it goes back to building those really good habits and those rules. So you don't feel like, you feel like you're in control. Because again, I'm also a little bit of a perfectionist. I want to feel in control of things. So having those rules makes you feel in control, but it makes it easier to not obsess, and just create a little bit of space in between, um, thinking about money and dealing with money. And again, it works perfectly for me to have that 30-minute period. So I'm not just constantly obsessing over every single dollar amount. And again, a lot of this comes back to sort of just bringing more awareness to your financial decisions. So you're a perfectionist around money. Why? Why are you so focused on maybe the number, hitting this specific goal? And when you start to kind of question that, that's where you can come into like, oh, this is a root cause of why I'm feeling this way. And this has been kind of personally my lifelong journey with money, is like unpacking why I'm so fixated on these kind of number goals. And I think that's how you can kind of start to build those better habits to kind of get where you want to go without um, obsessing over it too much.
Good. I think we'll end there.
Cool.
Thank you. Um, that was great. I think yeah, it is I mean, all of it's just interesting, and I obviously talk about this multiple times a day with my guests, but it is just so interesting the way our brains work and all of that, because it's like we're, the money experts and we get it, but it's like it's just so sad or frustrating that like so many people don't like have the negative about it, and it's like, how do you undo this? How do we undo this?
Well, I think for a lot of people, well, one, I think people see it as like this cold, rational, mathematical thing, and they don't think about just how much emotion goes into it. I think also, too, you know, a lot of people didn't grow up with financial literacy. And I think a lot of people learn by doing, right? So when you're growing up, maybe you're not handling money, maybe you're not seeing your parents handle it, because again, it's very taboo for a lot of people to talk about. So then when you're kind of thrust into the real world and you're having to deal with it on your own, it can feel overwhelming. I mean, I know so many people that are like, I'm just paralyzed. I don't know how to make a decision. And like, of course, we've never had more information available online. There's never been a better time to kind of learn about money, but it's can feel like a tsunami, right? Like there's just so much information. And also, because personal finance is so personal, you can read all this stuff online, but you're always thinking like, well, wait, what about my very specific situation? Like, how does this actually apply to me? So it can feel really paralyzing for people, for sure.